Hey everyone! So it's the end of the month again, which means I want to go through all the books that I read in March, as well as all the books that I plan on reading in April. Starting off with the first book that I read in March, which is this, Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan, which is the ninth book in the Wheel of Time series. Now, I gotta say, I am still in the middle of this series where it is considered the slog, and it very much is so, especially with this book again. But as far as the slog books that I've read so far, this one is probably my favorite, or at least close to my favorite out of the slog books. It's way, way better, in my opinion, than the eighth book, which was The Path of Daggers. This one, at least something actually happens in this story. Some pretty big things that I imagine are going to have a lasting impact in the future books of the series. But overall, I really gotta say, this book was still really hard to get through. It was still really, really slow. Not much happened, really not much at all in the story. There were only kind of a couple of big things that really went down. And again, it just seems like this series is just taking its sweet, sweet time for anything to happen. And I know that is kind of the big thing that people say between books, I think it's like 7 through 10. They're just not very good. And again, as far as the Wheel of Time is concerned, this is another book that really makes me wonder, or makes me ask myself, am I even a big fan of this series anymore? And I think the answer to that is sort of. I am still a fan of the Wheel of Time series, but the first 6 books, maybe the 7th book too, A Crown of Swords, I can't remember if that one was also good, but at least the first 6 books were absolutely amazing. I mean, the first 2, I guess, were fine, but like books 3, 4, and 5, and 6 were all really, really, really good, and I was absolutely loving this series. And then it just starts to just slow down so much. And I'm getting to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, sure, I still like the Wheel of Time, but definitely not as much as I used to. I gotta say, I am pretty happy that this book I did enjoy more than the 8th book by quite a bit. I mean, I definitely won't say I love this book, but I would say it was fine. It's a fine book. It's not a bad book, but it's just fine. So, yeah, I am gonna continue reading through the Wheel of Time series. I do have the next book in the series, book 10, which is Crossroads of Twilight, which I hear is the worst book in the series. But assuming I can get through that book sane and still want to continue the series, I really do want to continue the series. I mean, geez, I've put so much time reading these. They're not tiny books at all. And for me to just, I feel like, give up at this point when, especially when the series is supposedly going to take a turn and start getting really good again, I don't want to give it up. But as far as the slog books in the Wheel of Time series, I'd probably consider this the best of the worst Wheel of Time books that I've read so far. So that was the first book I read in March. The next book I read was this, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And this book, I gotta say, absolutely fantastic. I loved this book so much. So much so that I would arguably put this as, it's gotta be in my top 10 best books I've ever read. A lot of that is because I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing. I had no idea what the story was about, other than I assumed it was about some guy named Dorian Gray and maybe a picture of him, which yeah, that's kind of the story. The story is about this picture of Dorian Gray and about Dorian Gray himself. That's all I'm going to say about the story, because if you don't know anything about this, I highly, highly, highly recommend you read this book. It surprised me. I really enjoyed it so much. Of course, it's a classic. Everyone's heard of Oscar Wilde, and this is, I think, his most popular novel, his most famous novel. He does have other ones, but when you think of Oscar Wilde, you think of The Picture of Dorian Gray. And it's no wonder why, because this book is amazing. I really don't want to talk about the story at all, but it very much surprised me, I'll say that, because I was not expecting it to cover these certain topics that it ended up covering. And also, especially after reading A Winter's Heart, it was really nice reading a book that was fast-paced. Things really happened really quickly, not in like a jarring way at all. Again, it was really well written. The prose is amazing in this book. I mean, again, Oscar Wilde. Yeah, his most popular book. Of course it's going to be amazing. But it is a very fast-paced book, but in a really, really immaculate way, I gotta say. It's written perfectly. I can't say enough good things about this book. So I'm just going to stop and say, if you haven't read this book, you need to read it. It's amazing. I loved it. It's got to be in my top 10 best books I've ever read. So that was the second book I read in March. The last book that I ended up reading, or at least finishing in March, was this, Isaac Asimov's Prelude to Foundation. Now, the original Foundation trilogy, which is Foundation, Foundation and Empire, and then Second Foundation, that trilogy is, for me, arguably my favorite trilogy of books I've ever read. It's right up there with, I gotta say, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I absolutely love those books, especially the second one, which was Foundation and Empire. The story centered around the mule. That was awesome. If you've read that book, you know what I'm talking about. Absolutely fantastic. If you haven't read the Foundation trilogy and you do enjoy science fiction, yeah, you got to check it out. Now this, Prelude to Foundation, as you can guess by the title, Prelude, is a prequel to the Foundation trilogy. So it kind of sets up the events that take place in that trilogy. Now, this was a good book, a very good book, but one of the things that kind of disappointed me about this, and it wouldn't have disappointed me if I knew this going in, but this is one of two prequel books to the Foundation trilogy. There's a second prequel book, a sequel to this. So I think it's called Forward to Foundation. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. I went into this not knowing that, because I really like to go into books not knowing anything about them. Like, it really helps my enjoyment of the story, because then I'm going to be surprised. I have no idea what to expect. But then you kind of have some instances where that hurts your enjoyment, because I went into this book thinking, oh, this is going to set up the Foundation trilogy perfectly, and that'll be awesome. It does, sort of, kind of, but it is very much a first book in a two-part series. Which, if I knew that going in, it wouldn't have bothered me as much as it does, because I don't even have the second one, so now I need to get Forward to Foundation. I'm going to have to read it, because this, I don't want to complain about this book. It was a very good book. Definitely not as good as the original Foundation trilogy. Still a good book. The middle part, I will say, was a little bit on the slow side. Some of the character interactions, or how they change, how they develop throughout the story, was a little iffy for me. again, when I read Isaac Asimov books, I normally don't read them for good character development or really getting invested in characters. The reason I like Isaac Asimov books is for the world he creates, for these fantastical worlds that are obviously fiction, but you can see how they can be based in fact, and how society could get to the level where it's almost like a realistic, portrayal of what humankind will be like in the future. And I really, really do like that. I don't read these books for like, oh, I love this character and I want to see what happens to him. Not that his characters are bad, they're just kind of forgetful. And that's kind of with this book. The main character, I will say that I like him far more than any of the secondary or other primary characters in this story. The main reason for that is because this main character is what sets up the events in those trilogy books. So it is kind of fascinating learning about him and the actions that he takes to set up the foundation, the story that takes place in those later books. Still, though, this book is definitely not as good as the original trilogy, but it still is okay. The main fault I have with this is going to have to be the middle part of the story, which really slows down quite a bit and kind of takes a little while to get through and for things to actually start happening again. It's not nearly as bad as Winter's Heart or the Slog books in Wheel of Time, but the first third of this book is go, 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 really good, really fast, really fascinating, great stuff. But then the second third it's not slow, but it definitely slows down quite a bit, kind of jarring, honestly. The pacing is like, oh, again, and then it ends. So first third, really good. Second third, kind of boring, kind of slow. Last third, really good again, really fast-paced. The ending is... It's not forced, but the ending is very... I don't want to spoil the story, but what I will say is that at the ending of this book, there are some twists, multiple twists, that kind of hit you back to back to back. And it's kind of jarring. And then it just abruptly ends, which again, if I knew that this was not just a one prequel before the trilogy, it wouldn't have bothered me. But the fact that now I'm going to have to read forward to Foundation because I love these books and this book is still really good. But it was jarring, and it did kind of sort of disappoint me a tiny, tiny bit. Still a really good book. If you read the Foundation trilogy, yeah, I would say I would recommend this. I do need to read the Forward to Foundation, the sequel to this book, to really be able to judge it if I would recommend this to people. But this book is still pretty good. Just keep in mind that the closure you get isn't fantastic because it is first part in a, two-part prequel series. The next book that I am currently reading, I haven't finished reading it yet, is Crossroads to Twilight. This book I am only, 250 pages in, so I don't know if that's focused. That's it's not quite halfway there, but more than 1/3 of the way there. And oh boy, when people say that this is their least favorite Wheel of Time book, I can totally understand why. So far, this book has been painful to get through. Like I said, I'm already 250 pages into this story, which is already longer than this book is, this amazing book. It's already longer than that book, and it's half as long as this book, and nothing has happened. Literally nothing. Nothing. All that's happened is this character has walked over here, and then this character has gone over there. Oh, and that character? he's now over there. That's literally it. Maybe something's going to happen in this, but I really doubt it. I really, really doubt it based off of what I've heard online. This book is brutal. And I'm kind of to the point where, and I've already said this, but what the heck is the point in this book? Like, seriously. It honestly seems, I don't know, it almost seems like Robert Jordan was trying to kill off, like, the Wheel of Time series with, like, the last 3 or 4 books. And I don't get it. Because it was such a good series. And now, I haven't finished this book so I really don't want to pass judgment. I'm trying not to. But it's hard. Because I don't like this book. I really, really am not enjoying this book at all. Again, I'm not done. Maybe it's not going to be as bad as I think it is, but this isn't just a bad Wheel of Time book. This is just straight up a bad book. It's not a good book. I'm not enjoying it, and really, it's killing my enjoyment of the Wheel of Time series. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say about this, because I haven't finished it, but this is going to be the first book that I end up reading in April. The next book that I want to read is a book that I got for my birthday from my kids. My kids bought me this. An Agatha Christie book. And Then There Were None. This is like one of the highest selling books, I think, ever. I don't think it's up there with like the Charles Dickens A Tale of Two Cities, but it's like ranked like 3 or 4 or 5 as like the top selling book in the world ever. You know, minus religious books like the Bible. Obviously, that's sold way, 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 way more than anything else. But I am a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, all of those books. I love mystery books, but I've never read any Christie Wilde. What the heck? I'm thinking of Oscar Wilde. I've never read any Agatha Christie before, and I mean, she is arguably one of the most famous mystery writers ever, and this is one of her most famous books ever. At least it's her top-selling book she ever wrote. I don't know. Oh, look at that. It even says right here, Mystery's #1 best-selling author. So there you go. She is the #1 best-selling mystery author. And I haven't read her. I love mystery books. I love the Sherlock Holmes books. All of them. Even the ones that aren't, the best. I still love them. So I am very much looking forward to this. I don't know anything about it, but I really have been wanting to read Agatha Christie for a long time. So I'm going to start off with, why not her most famous book, And Then There Were None. The next book that I'm going to read is a bit different because this is an indie book, and this is called Shelley by Doug Brode. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I don't think it's Brody. I think it's Doug Brode. So the author actually provided this book to me to do a review. So I do plan on doing that, or at least, covering my opinion of it at the end of next month. Because I did want to do this for the author, since he was able to send this copy to me for free. So that's kind of just a heads up for all of you. Of course, I will say that when I review that at the end of April. But this is a science fiction book, as you can kind of tell from the cover. Again, I don't really know anything about it other than the fact that it is science fiction. My wife actually read this book, which is interesting, because she's not really into science fiction all that much, but she read the synopsis of this, so she thought it would be kind of interesting if she read it, and she actually really enjoyed this book quite a bit. She didn't love it, but she enjoyed it quite a bit. So, yeah, that's going to be the next book that I read in April. So I got 3 books so far, if you include the Crossroads of Twilight, which I'm almost halfway through. So I'm not sure if I'm going to get to this book. I certainly won't finish this next book, but the next book I want to read is a Stephen King book, The Shining. Now, I have read this book before, but kind of a long time ago, like way back in high school, probably early high school, like freshman, sophomore year, something like that. It certainly wasn't senior year or even junior year. Maybe it was even 8th grade. I don't know. I read this book a really long time ago. Kind of like, I used to be really big into Stephen King back in high school and junior high. But then, since then, I haven't read any Sherlock Holmes. I haven't read, geez, I keep messing up. I haven't read any Stephen King for like at well over 10 years, maybe 15, 20 years. I don't even know. But what I do remember is that I really enjoyed this book. I was a big fan of Stephen King, so I do want to try reading more of Stephen King in the future. So I thought I would read this book again because I really have no memory of it. I remember the high-level plot points of this story, but I really don't remember I don't really remember how the story goes or the characters or really anything about it. So I do want to try reading this book again. I certainly am not going to finish it in the month of April. I might be able to start it at least a little bit. It's really not too long of a book. Well, it's kind of long. It's like 700 pages. But that's not too bad. It's like reading a Robert Jordan book. And at least I know this isn't going to be a slog to get through. But yeah, The Shining by Stephen King. Really want to get back into reading some more Stephen King because for some reason I just stopped reading him a long time ago. And he's one of the most famous authors ever, so I thought might as well start with The Shining since it is one of his most famous books. I do remember that I read it a long time ago. I loved it a lot. It was one of my favorite books he wrote. I really loved The Green Mile as well. And then the other one was, I can't remember. Oh, Pet Sematary. That was also a fantastic book. I don't really remember those either, but I'm going to read The Shining and then maybe see how that goes and maybe read some more Stephen King books from the library. I don't have any Stephen King books other than this one in my collection. But yeah, that's the stack of all the books I plan on reading in the month of April. And sorry about that, my camera just died. So I just showed you all the books I plan on reading in April. These are all of the books that I read in March, again, just for visualizing it. My favorite book in March is, of course, this, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Absolute classic. Gotta be up there easily in my top 10, maybe even my top 5 books I've ever read. Really, really amazing. Surprised me so much. I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did. Of course, my least favorite book, Winter's Heart. Again, not as bad as the other slower books in the Wheel of Time series, but still not a great book. But yeah, those are all the books I read in March. Those are all of the books that I plan on reading in April. If you have any comments or questions for me, leave them down below in the comments section, and I will see you all again next time. Bye!